All righty. Hello, everyone. I'm about to start our webinar. My name is Allison Hilliard, and I am the Legislative Manager for the Climate Center, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my presentation with you all. All righty. Well, thank you everyone for joining. Again, my name is Allison Hilliard. I am the Legislative Manager for the Climate Center, and I will be moderating today's webinar. Our speakers for today include Senator Josh Becker, Vinnie Sala with Peridot, our Chief Program Officer, Barry Vesser, and myself. I first want to thank our sponsors for supporting this critical work, Bay Area Air District, Peninsula Clean Energy, MCE, Riverbank, and Sunrun. I also want to thank our promotional partners for helping us to promote these webinars. Thank you so much. So, since 2001, the Climate Center has been a leader in making climate action solutions a reality in California at speed and scale. We're think tank, do tank, working to turn bold ideas into action for a climate safe future for all. Today, we work statewide in collaboration with business, local governments, labor unions, and environmental justice leaders to deliver the equitable climate solutions that science demands. We all know that the science is dire. We are on the verge of irreversible tipping points around the world, from burning rainforests to melting sea ice and rising sea levels, dying coral reefs, and unfortunately, so much more. In the face of the federal hostility to climate action, California must step up and lead. Our state has the fourth largest economy on earth, and we really can move the needle on climate. And California is demonstrating clear climate leadership, not only on a national level, but on the global stage. Barry Vesser and I attended COP30 last month, where we spoke with Governor Newsom, Senator Becker, and Senator Stern about what California is doing to lead the way for others and to learn from others. So I'm first going to start off by kind of explaining what COP is. So the United Nations Climate Conference happens and takes place every year and is the world's only multilateral decision-making forum on climate change, and it brings together almost every country on Earth. It's referred to as the Conference of Parties, which is what COP stands for. And it's where the world comes together to agree on the actions to address the climate crisis, such as limiting the global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius, helping vulnerable communities adapt to the effects of climate change, and achieving net zero emissions by 2050. The goal is to bring together world leaders and negotiators from the member states or the member parties of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, that's also referred to as the UNFCCC. And the goal is to further global progress with business leaders, young people, climate scientists, indigenous people, and civil society sharing insights about the best practices to strengthen global, collective, and inclusive climate action. So this last year, in November this year, COP took place in Belém, Brazil. You can see it here. It's the white circle on this map. The city has a population of about 2.4 million people, and it sits at the Amazon River Basin, about 80 miles from the coast. Um, and so this is where COP30 was this year. It changes every year. So I'm gonna explain kind of how like the logistics of the actual conference happen. So there at the conference there's a blue zone and a green zone. I'm gonna first talk about the blue zone, but on this map, I just want to share that the green zone is actually the area that is shaded green. The blue zone is gonna encompass everything else from the red, the yellow, the purple, the orange, and the blue. And the blue zone is the formal conference and negotiation space that's managed by the United Nations Climate Change. All of the official sessions, meetings, side events, pavilion presentations, and press conferences all take place in the blue zone. And only party delegations, heads of states, admitted observers like the Climate Center, and the accredited press can enter the blue zone. The green zone, however, is a platform to showcase solutions and pathways from the global community and civil society. The green zone is going to be managed by the host country, which changes every year, like I said, and is a space for youth representatives, artists, businesses, regional and local decision makers, and many other civil society actors to discuss, present, and exchange ideas and solutions for a net zero future in a more informal setting. For example, there's the form of presentations, podium discussions, poster sessions, and artists and exhibitions that all take place in the green zone. So you might be thinking, why was the Climate Center at COP30? We are a California-based nonprofit. Well, the Climate Center became an official observer organization to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, the UNFCCC, back in 2020. As an observer, we're able to help a limited number of California policymakers and nonprofit leaders gain entrance to the annual gathering of the tens of thousands of attendees from all over the world. We know that other countries are moving swiftly on climate change, and bridging our state leaders with these countries helps increase their excitement for climate action. As goes California, goes the world. But we know that other places are moving the needle on climate action, and that collaboration is essential to make significant progress to address climate change. We are a state that has such powerful economic status and incredible innovators, but we must collaborate on the global stage to truly move the needle on climate change. In this photo here, you can see I did a press conference with Secretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture, Karen Ross, and we also held another press conference, which is the other photo, where we spoke with United States leaders about what they're doing in the states despite what is happening at our federal level. And I'll talk about that a little bit more later. So, the United States presence at COP30. This was a very unique year because there was not a significant United States presence. We are no longer a party to the negotiations. However, the Climate Registry, which is a nationwide environmental nonprofit, had their own pavilion and strategically named it the USA Pavilion. And many passerby people, a lot of people passed the pavilion, and they were not only excited to see that we were there, but they were also surprised. So it was really cool to get to see the excitement that there was a US pavilion and people really wanted to know what was going on. As it relates to the negotiations aspect of COP, the US lack of presence was really felt. The US had a key role in guiding people and using our weight to move the negotiations along, but we were not an official party anymore, so that absence was really felt. However, a positive note, the California governor, Gavin Newsom, did make an appearance and he was like a celebrity. People were following him everywhere. He made a point to say that Trump is handing China the biggest economic opportunity in history with how the US is currently handling climate change. And so it was really powerful to have the governor from California there and showing true leadership. So speaking about the federal administration, so the United States presence as it relates to the federal level. Oh, oops. Oh, okay, is everyone on this side? Okay. So originally, 17 Congresspeople were planned to attend COP30, but due to the government shutdown, almost all ended up not being able to attend. However, one Congress member, Senator Sheldon Whitehouse of Rhode Island, did in fact make it to Brazil. I went to an event where he was the keynote speaker, and I thanked him for prioritizing coming to COP30. And during his speech, he did share that Trump does not represent the US on climate, which really helped ease the many concerns of the international audience he was speaking to. In the United States, we are not only the largest economy in the world, but we're the second largest climate polluter, and we can't shirk our responsibility without having real consequences. So, on that note, we did host a press conference with Senator Becker, Linda Hopkins, the chair of the Bay Area Air District, and Alex Cornell Duho, the co-founder and president of Elected Officials to Protect America, where they all shared examples of important work happening in the states despite the current hostile federal administration. In the middle photo there, you can see the senator was swarmed after the press conference, showcasing how many people wanted to know what California and the US was doing and is doing on climate change. So this was my first time attending COP, and I wanted to give just a couple takeaways that I had as a first timer. So being in the event space, you could really feel the powerful exchange of ideas through the countless side events, pavilion discussions, and even the casual talks while walking from one event to the next. It was really cool to see the exchange of ideas from the bottom up instead of the top down. COP provided an opportunity for NGOs to share what they are working on with an international audience and subnational audience. It was also so incredible to be surrounded by so many different languages, clothing styles, and fascinating perspectives. You could really feel the diversity, and it was just such an incredible experience to be surrounded by a variety of people. However, there were some general frustrations with where we're at as a planet. You could feel from most people there that we're not doing enough. But with even that feeling of frustration, there was true excitement for collaboration and innovative ideas for positive change. So I just want to highlight that our call to action today is to urge Governor Newsom to accelerate the adoption of affordable, clean energy, a fossil fuel, and to phase out fossil fuels and focus on nature-based climate solutions. That the call to action link will be in the chat. And then going back to what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you for the time to give the kind of overview of what COP is. During today's webinar, you will hear from Senator Becker, Vinnie Sala with Terradot, Barry Besser, our Chief Program Officer, and you will hear again from me later on. I'm going to start off by introducing Senator Josh Becker, who is a public policy innovator working at the nexus of community activism, technology, and social justice. Elected to the California State Senate in November of 2020, Senator Becker represents over 1 million Californians. He's the chair of California Senate Energy Committee and recently passed critical electricity affordability legislation that will save the state significant money. He also authored an important distributed energy resources bill intended to reduce grid strain and provide both resiliency and financial relief to California residents. He was one of the very few U.S. elected leaders at COP30. And Senator, we would love to hear from you about your experience. So I would love to introduce you and have you join us now. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen. Hello, Senator. Thank you so
O-
much for joining us.
Okay, can you see me?
Yes.
Okay, excellent. Well, first of all, it was wonderful to see those pictures. It reminds me of two things. One, I feel it's been so nonstop since I've gotten back. I haven't had a time even to really properly reflect still, but also just brought back so many wonderful memories from COP. So thank you to you, Barry. Thank you to the Climate Center for being there, being on the ground the whole time. Belém was not an easy place to get to, not an easy place to find lodging or navigate around, and I'm really grateful to you all. Um, I'd say a few things. Number one, as you mentioned, our federal government was not there, and the only worst thing worse than them not being there was if they had been there, because the president's been calling climate change a hoax, and this caused great consternation, clearly, in the eyes of the rest of the world, because they're saying, "What is going on here?" The U.S., this global leader, they completely backing away. They're not even going to be there at COP. They're the president's attacking, calling this a hoax, even though we see the impacts of climate change around the world in wildfires, in floods, in excuse me, and so many negative impacts that are already happening today. Um, and so by the way, the Champagne region of France, that climate is now in southern England. So southern England actually can make great champagne now. I mean, it just shows the effects are happening at all kinds of levels, in all kinds of ways. And our president is in denial, was not there. Yeah, so that really left a void, and grateful to say that we were able to fill that void from California. And so, one of my takeaways, honestly, sometimes Woody Allen used to say 90% of life is just showing up. In this case, just showing up was a huge moment, and I've never gotten so much appreciation for just being there. That was just absolutely tremendous. Number two, as you say, I was some people like it's probably not the best analogy, but it's like the Super Bowl of climate. I mean, everyone there cares passionately about climate from all over the world. So you get ideas just literally when I was boarding the bus, to go to the center. Um, I met some people. There was two people at my bus stop, and they're working on taxing departures, both private planes and first class and premium class tickets to create a global climate fund that focused more on Europe, but something that we can look at here as well. That's what they do. That's one of their big initiatives across the EU. So everywhere you look, everyone you talk to, there's an idea, there's a person, there's somebody working on this at some juncture in their country, in their region. And I was there to say that and let people know that President Trump does not speak for all Americans, and that here in California, we, by wide margins, continue to believe that confronting climate change and accelerating clean energy is not just an environmental priority, but a moral, economic, and a public health imperative. And my son turned 20 while I was there, and it was just a great reminder that this is not just about the economy. It's not just about the environment. This is really about the future of the planet for our kids and for our grandkids. And that really brought the gravity of the situation home for me. But one of my other big takeaways was good news. And people say, "What? What do you mean good news?" I say, "Yes, it was starting with Rio, which was the subnational, and mayors. We had mayors from all over the U.S. and all over the world, and state leaders. Um, and then in COP itself in Belém was good news. Whether it be Boise, Idaho, where they are they're an all electric new fire station, all electric new gas station, whether it be in Melbourne, Australia, where they are taking action on data centers and energy, same that we can now coordinate with. Um, whether it was Australia, who's just going from I think 70% coal when I was there, now 63% coal to 0% coal, 63% coal to 0% coal in 7 years, and they've stood up three um, institutions, let's just call them, finance agencies, the pieces they're going to need to make that massive transition, and they're doing it, and they're doing it. But all along was good news. So what I want to tell you, I'm telling you all here because I've been working on it since I got back, is that I'm launching a good news climate blog. So it'll be available on my website as early as maybe today. Launching a good news climate blog because we also that was a great thing. Had good news to share, and when I gave a talk in Glasgow, it was a good talk. It was there was a few people, a few press in a small room, and when we did I did my first press conference. We did one together, and both of them was a massive room. I couldn't believe I walked in, massive room, packed with press and also just curious people. They wanted to hear what was California going to say in this moment. And for me, I ran for this moment. I ran because I tried to make change at the federal level, and I know so it's very hard to do climate policy, any real regulation. But I saw California, we are the fourth largest economy in the world. If we were our own country, we can do it here. Not that it's easy. We struggle sometimes, and I've had my shares of wins and losses over the last 5 years. But we had a lot of good news to report because of the work that we did. That we are at, from 5%, clean energy grid just not that many years ago. That we're at almost two-thirds of our energy comes from zero emission sources. I was able to share that 29% EVs last quarter of the new car purchase were EVs, 7% of the fleet. Right now, we had our biggest, it was 3%, but our biggest year to year reduction of GHG emissions in the history of California. Just in the last year, we were able to get data for that. We did our cap and invest system. We reauthorized it, strengthened it to is our really our a big part of our roadmap to net zero, and we did that. It's going to generate also $4 to $5 billion a year that we can work on climate solutions. All these things we were able to share, and I was able to share the good news. We were able to do events with the governor, with corporations too. That was also honestly part of the good news. Was also one of my takeaways. I was just at Netflix doing tremendous things in sustainability. Formula One, there's going to be no fossil fuels in their engines as of next year. But that's only a small part of the emissions. They're decarbonizing everything. But there was about 50 large companies that signed the climate pledge to be net zero by I believe by 2040, I believe. And so to be with DHL is purchasing 1 billion liters of sustainable aviation fuel by 2030. All these corporations that are stepping up, Pepsi that's buying all the electric trucks here in California. All that good news. It was really amazing. One last thing I want to talk about. So um, I'd always sort of intellectually heard about the Amazon. You say, oh, Amazon's the lungs of the planet. Okay, great, yeah, but it feels a little bit like a throwaway line. Well, being there, even though just landing in Belém and just getting to see, you really felt like, okay, this is the mouth of the Amazon. This is really um, we're here, but just being there and going, across it from Rio actually to Belém. I mean, we're saying this is larger than the continental U.S. This is across nine countries, and the indigenous leaders really are the stewards of that. They are protecting this land, and there's some folks who'd come to Sacramento to work with me on a resolution because it turns out that almost 50% of the oil that is destructively extracted from the Amazon comes to California, believe it or not. And people have a hard time grasping that, but that's because our refiners are optimized for a particular kind of heavy crude. But it means that we are partly responsible then, and if we don't decrease demand soon enough and find other ways to get off of oil from the Amazon, we are responsible because there's the government of Ecuador is approving new leases right now, even though they've done a big referendum to stop it. Anyway, so some of these leaders had come to Sacramento and worked with me on this resolution that we passed to get California off of Amazon crude. And I literally, when I was walking to the venue the first day, a little stressed because I had my press conference at 1. It was like, 12 o'clock. And literally the first people I see outside were these very same folks who had come to Sacramento. And I felt like I was at home and I got to spend a lot of time with them and celebrating them and folks who came on a 30-day boat by boat on the river from Ecuador. And I was at the celebration when they arrived. And then we did this flotilla of 200 ships that went out to greet all these indigenous folks and come back in to Belém. And it was incredible. And I have a video that I'm still kind of finalizing. But it was with all these indigenous leaders as part of this who are making a stand against both agribusiness and against oil and other mining going on in the Amazon region. Because I won't go through it here, but I was able to understand in just a much more scientific way how, with these billion trees. The Amazon River, by the way, is 6 times as big as the next six rivers combined. But that these the when the rain comes, by the way, you feel like the world's coming to an end when we were there in COP, right? Like the rain, like, oh my God, like this is gonna the first day we we're there, it's just pounding on the roof. And it happens every day, but it's also hot and humid. And when these with photosynthesis, with the what they send into the atmosphere is like 6 times as big as the river itself. And then that is the flying rivers, the atmospheric rivers that come to California and cool us. So, just understanding at a much deeper level that connection and why we need to take action and to reduce our demand for oil, to get off of oil from the Amazon, and all of our climate action. It just really brought so much of that home to me, the importance of it. So happy to answer any questions, or we just had it was just an incredible trip, an incredible opportunity. Lots of follow-ups already happened. And excited to work with folks, including some of your future the next guests on this webinar going forward, because we really need to. We did have a big session, thanks to Climate Center, our partners on climate last year in the legislature, a really big one. But now we need to even double down even more. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Senator. I have time for one or two questions. Um, Thank you for just giving such a wonderful, broad overview of all the many different things that you were engaged with while you were there. I did want to ask, were there any policy solutions that you felt might have been missing from COP30 that you wished had better representation and or any representation at all?
I mean, really everything was covered. I mean, we did electrification panel together. That we had for the first time ever a carbon removal pavilion. So you have these pavilions that people go around, and there's different events at the different pavilions. And first time ever, we had a carbon removal pavilion, and that's something that's, I'd say, doesn't, it's been kind of missing overall from our solution set in a sense, because there's no net zero without removing carbon. Even our most optimistic projections have us going from 390 million metric tons to 70 million metric tons by 2045. The rest of that has to be carbon removal, and we need to build out that capacity um, to do that. So, but there's focus. I mean, so everything was there. Maybe things could have been weighted slightly differently, but every solution was there, and that's what makes it really fun.
It was a lot of fun. It was so cool to walk around all the different pavilions and hear there's so many different presentations that were happening. Another audience question is, lots of municipalities are rolling back on climate action work due to the budget cuts and concerns over affordability. How are political and climate leaders in California going to help local governments continue to drive climate action as political will and budget shrinks?
So great question. I was just at meeting with all the staff. I did a lunch and learn at PCE, Peninsula Clean Energy, our local CCA yesterday, and hearing about the programs that they're doing and working with. And I said, one of my goals along with this Good News Climate blog is to promote all these things, making sure people know all the rebates available, doing much more how to on electrifying your home. Um, and all the things that you can do that we can do as an individual and that our cities can do. Because as the incentives go away from the federal government in January, we need to step up with our own procurement to continue to bring down the prices of these new technologies, as we did with solar that came down 90% in 10 years, 300% over 30 years. We need to continue to bring down the cost of all these technologies that the rest of the world can adopt. And now that it's going to be local leadership. So I represent 25 small and medium-sized cities. Many of them want to be leaders on climate, and I will be working very closely with all of them.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I have a fun question for you as it relates to our time while we were down there. Was there a specific type of local cuisine that you really enjoyed while we were down there?
Yeah, I was just thinking I missed the takaka soup in Belém, which is this soup. It's a certain herb. Um, they have to make it over a couple days and grind out. Otherwise, it's poisonous essentially. But even when you eat it, there's a tingle on your tongue, and it was. I remember the first day, got to try it, and I loved it. I had it whenever I could possibly have it, and I wish I could have some right now. But there was a lot of fun moments, but that was one.
It would definitely be really good with the foggy weather we're having in the northern parts of California.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, final question for you. Coming out of COP30, what are some climate policies that you are planning to work on in 2026? Because I know we at the Climate Center are very excited to continue working with you and your staff.
Yeah. Well, all of them. And we have a whole plan to continue to bring down electricity prices but at the same time, increase electrification. So there's a number of policies we're working on, looking at workarounds to the EPA taking away the waiver. So, clean cars and clean trucks, industrial emissions. We got some good ideas there. That's one area where we've made basically zero progress. About 20% of our emissions are from the industrial sector. There was a guy I met there. He had been a legislator in Finland for 15 years. Was working on basically using all the data we have in the case of California and all these CEQA filings to do better streamlining and permitting. And he was in my office in Sacramento literally the next week. So there's lots and lots of follow up that will be happening.
Wonderful. Well, it was such an honor to get to go to COP30 and spend so much time with you, Senator, and just see you be such a leader in all of the different conversations, presentations, press conferences, pavilion events. And I really look forward to working with you and your staff in the next year and the many years to come. And so just wanted to extend gratitude. And I'm going to go ahead and move us on to the next speaker. And just want to again thank you so much for your time. And if there's any closing things you'd like to say, now is the time.
No, it was a wonderful experience. Onward, and look for my Good News Climate vlog coming up soon.
Yes, we'll make sure to send that around. Thank you so much. Alrighty, I am now going to introduce Barry Vesser. Barry joined the Climate Center in 2005 and has held positions as Deputy Director and Financial Officer. He currently leads Climate Centers the Climate Center's programs and policy development and implementation teams. In 2018, Barry began working with a group of energy experts and advocates, envisioning a more decentralized energy system that was clean, affordable, resilient, and equitable. He then championed the development of the Climate Center's Community Energy Resilience Project, which accumulated the creation of $170 million for community energy resilience investment programs by the California Energy Commission in August of 2022. Barry is a COP season veteran. He's been to a handful, and I'm very excited to pass the mic over to him and hear what he has to share. Thank you, Barry.
Oops, thanks so much, Allison. Really appreciate that. Let me pull my slides up And thanks everyone for being here. It was really an honor to be at COP and to be with so many amazing people who were, working uh, to make the world better through reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And Senator Becker mentioned when we first came into COP, and Alice and I were with him, he saw these indigenous activists who he had worked with in Sacramento who were trying to stop oil from being exported out of the Amazon. And this is that group right at the front of COP. And I do want to just quickly say that this COP was meant to be kind of an indigenous peoples COP. And in many ways it was. They were everywhere to be seen in the Blue Zone and many presentations, but I think they also felt like in the formal proceedings of COP, which are a little bit separate from like the pavilion presentations and the side events and the other things going on. That's where the nation states actually negotiate agreements that their voices were not heard and not honored. So we've got a lot of work to do still. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the outcomes from COP. Uh, what does that mean for California climate action? And also add to some of the things Senator Becker said about, good things that happened at COP, ideas that we can take away from a perspective of some of the things that the Climate Center was directly involved in. So just to add a couple of things to what Senator Becker said about California's contribution to COP, Governor Newsom was there, as Allison said, he was like a rock star. People were following him everywhere. He had huge crowds. Um, and um, and he also had an entourage of agency heads from California. I think there were like 8 agency heads who were at COP, and they were signing bilateral agreements with both subnational governments, national governments, including Colombia, Chile, Denmark, and Brazil. And that picture there, I'm sure you can't see it, but that's Governor Newsom and Secretary Wade Crowfoot signing an agreement in the German pavilion. We couldn't even get in. We had to watch it on a monitor because it was so full. One of the other things Newsom said while he was there was that Trump has abdicated his responsibility, but that California is open for climate and clean energy business, and that we want to be a place where businesses invest and help us reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. I'm going to come back to why I think that's so important later. Um, Senator Henry Stern from the LA area was also at COP. And he kind of made a decision to come late in the game, but he was in a number of presentations. And in one of the forums I saw him in, somebody said, we have to get people to conserve more. What are you doing about that? And his answer to that, I think, was very interesting. He said, listen, I think we really have to focus on affordability. That is where people are. And we have to make climate action something that people want to do, that they see is in their both short-term interest and their longer-term interest. So I said I was going to talk about a few of the things we were involved in. One of the things we were involved in was an advanced geothermal presentation. And I'll tell you, when we went to COP, I had planned on having several other speakers join me to present on this. And we spent a week looking for people. Keep in mind, there's about 56,000 people at COP. Um, and there were some countries that were doing some things with geothermal, but long story short, I couldn't locate anyone. So I think it was hugely important that we decided to move forward with this. And I'm just going to give you a really quick overview of why we think geothermal is important, both for California, but also on the international stage. So on the left of the picture there, you see conventional geothermal. And what you see with conventional geothermal is they need the right geographic conditions to be able to put in a facility, and particularly subterranean geographical features. So in that picture, they're pumping water into a reservoir, but it's an existing reservoir underneath the earth, usually fairly close to the surface. Um, but deep enough that it's being heated up so that water gets superheated. And then they pump it back up, it spins turbines, and they create power. Um, I come from Sonoma County, and in Sonoma County, we have the largest geothermal power plant in the world. And they're putting out hundreds of megawatts of power. So it is a very important source of energy, but it's never been a huge contributor to renewables because of the need for, just the right kinds of conditions. Enhanced geothermal is one of the new advanced geothermal approaches. And in enhanced geothermal, they can dig deeper into the soil. So they're going down like 10,000, 20,000 feet. So they're getting to superheated rock, much hotter than the rock that's, closer to the surface. Um, they are then using oil and gas drilling techniques to break that rock up and create a reservoir. They're pumping water down into it. And then, as you can see from that other kind of L-shaped thing there, they're pumping that back up to the surface, heated and spinning a turbine, same kind of thing. Um, One of the things that's important about this as well, that's distinct from conventional geothermal, is that they can drill laterally. So those little L's at the bottom there, those can be up to 5,000 feet, and they're being able to extend those every time they redo, do new wells. So that means they're getting more resource. They're getting it from deeper, it's hotter, and that it's not geographically limited. And then finally, the closed loop geothermal on the right there, that's kind of the holy grail of geothermal because as you can see, like just imagine that blue line, that's a pipeline going down into the ground and then coming back up. It's like a U-shaped pipeline. So they're putting that down through the hot rock. They're pumping water through the pipeline or some other liquid, and it's heating up. And then they're bringing it to the surface. So the thing about this is it's incredibly water efficient. Um, so, but why should we care about geothermal? Why should we want to use this form of energy? Well, here's a few of the benefits. It's a 24/7, 365 days a year, clean, firm power source. So it's a wonderful complement to wind and solar. Very low greenhouse gas emissions. It can contribute to grid stability, resilience, and reliability here in California, but also elsewhere. Um, it's got a relatively small geographic footprint. So compared to solar, um, utility scale solar, per the megawatt hour that it generates, this is a much smaller footprint. Um, Now, with these new techniques, it's scalable and not geographically limited. They can use brine or wastewater actually as the fluid that they pump into the ground. So it need not compete with drinking water. And finally, the skills for geothermal are almost one-to-one transferable from oil and gas workers. So it's a really great source of, helping us in the energy transition, moving away from fossil fuels to something that has a low footprint. Now, I want to end this by saying, I'm not saying it's the perfect resource or it's 100% ready to go. We need to bring it down the cost curve. The power is still relatively expensive, but they're getting drilling costs down. And that's important because that's one of the major contributors to the expense. I mentioned water already as a resource that they are figuring out ways to deal with better. And also, there's induced seismicity, which just means it can create very small earthquakes, usually undetectable. But that's something you have to manage for. Okay, I'm going to move on. We were also invited to speak at a bidirectional EV charging uh, presentation in the Swedish pavilion. And I'll tell you, the first thing that my colleagues told me is that California is not leading in this. And what they were talking about was EV deployment. And they're absolutely correct. I forget what all the figures are, but I think Sweden's at like 58% of new sales in EVs are, I'm sorry, 58% of car sales are EVs in Sweden. In California, it's about 29% right now. However, um, in bidirectional EV charging, both in policy and in practice, California is a leader. Um, uh, we passed a bill SB 59 a few years ago with Senator Skinner that really has pushed us forward. That is now going through the agencies to do rulemaking. So I do think this is a place where we have a lead and can contribute. The thing I want you to take away from this, and I wanted our international colleagues to take away, is just the scale of this resource. So first, let's talk about what the resource is. Bidirectional charging simply means that, as you know, an electric vehicle takes a charge, right, that's coming through the electric grid into its battery. If it's bidirectionally enabled, it can also give a charge back to the grid, or it could give it to your home or to a load in your home, like your refrigerator. So if the power went out at your house, you could actually back it up on that your EV battery. And depending on the kind of EV you had and your usage and all those things, that could be up to 3 days. So it's really a tremendous resource. And when you aggregate electric vehicles across California, there's about 2 million. They become a very significant resource. So what this graph shows is total nationwide EV battery capacity will exceed peak US electricity demand in 2035. So that's just enormous, right? That's the entire demand for electricity in the United States of America. And long before it gets there, it will exceed the capacity of the entire natural gas generating fleet. Why is that important? Because if we could replace those natural gas peaker plants with EV batteries, storing that power and then releasing it when we need it, um, we could not only we could do away with those plants. And so we would not only reduce greenhouse gases and make a contribution to solving climate change, but we'd also greatly improve air quality. So now I'm going to shift a little bit and talk to you about what came out of COP in terms of key international issues. And I'm going to be honest with you, probably not a surprise to anybody, but the news here is pretty mixed. So I'm going to start out with just a quick conversation about nationally determined commitments. So nationally determined commitments, what they are is that every country that was part of the Paris Agreement agreed to set their own nationally determined commitments. So these are voluntary, but the idea is that they're going to add up to getting to the goals under the Paris Agreement, which is keeping warming in the world to 1.5 C and at the maximum 2 C of increase. So, what we found in COP, first of all, almost a lot of countries were very late on getting these nationally determined commitments, and they were supposed to be in January, and many of them were coming in just before COP met in November. And they don't add up. The analysis shows that right now it puts the world on track for an estimated 2.6 to 3.1 degrees of warming. So that would be catastrophic. They were also not on the, unbelievably, not on the official agenda at COP. Um, and people did recognize that they were inadequate. But basically, the approach was kicking the can down the road. Let's see what people come back with next year. Um, Climate finance, it was an initiative called Baku to Belém Roadmap, and is in Azerbaijan, and that's where COP was held last year. And this initiative aimed to help scale up climate finance to developing nations to reach the 1.3 trillion mark annually by 2035. And there was hope that some progress would be made at this COP on this. And basically, developed countries weren't having it. Nothing happened. It was completely blocked. Under adaptation finance, there was some progress made. So adaptation finance is different, right? Climate finance is investing in how do we reduce greenhouse gas emission. Adaptation finance is given the impacts we're already feeling from climate change and the ones we know are coming. What investments do we need to make sure we're more resilient? And an important thing to remember here is the developed countries are the ones who really were responsible for the lion's share of greenhouse gas emissions that are creating the climate impacts we're feeling now. Developing countries contributed relatively little, and they're not well positioned to deal with these, and they're getting the vast majority of the impacts. So there's a strong argument to be made that they should be getting money for adaptation from developed countries, and they wanted them to triple adaptation finance by 2030 to at least $120 billion. So there was progress on this. They did come to an agreement. Yes, they would do it, but they kicked the can down the road to 2035, and no new money was pledged, which of course means that it probably has to come out of monies that have been committed to something else right now by the international community. Um, oops. So I think one of the most important conversations at COP this time was that there were serious deliberations about phasing out of fossil fuels and ending subsidies to fossil fuels. And it really looked like something was going to happen. However, in the last few days of the conference, Saudi Arabia and Russia organized and led a group of petroleum producing countries that um, blocked this. And in the final agreement, the words fossil fuels were not even in the agreement. So after 30 years, like we can't put fossil fuels in a final agreement coming out of COP. Now, there is a silver lining to this very dark cloud that I'm going to get to in a moment. And just want to touch on a couple other issues that were COP. Brazil had an initiative that they were pushing called Tropical Forest Forever Facility. And the idea here was to create an economic incentive for conservation. And this would make it in countries' interests to actually preserve or even enhance their forests. They were able to raise $6.7 billion of this, very, well short of their goal, which was 25 billion. And you can see the countries there that supported it. Interestingly, China said, no, we're not going to support it. We think that developed countries should be the ones paying for this. And finally, there was also progress made on what they called the Belém Action Mechanism for Global Just Transition. So what they did in this is they defined what a just transition is. And there was also language in the agreement, unprecedented language that refers to labor, human rights, environmental rights, and a commitment to a just transition. So this is something that they can build on in future COPs. Sorry, I'm having just a little bit of trouble advancing my slides. Um, Beyond COP here, this is the silver lining I was talking about. Colombia and the Netherlands, when they saw the way things were going, they said, we're going to have the first international conference on a just transition away from fossil fuels. And they're doing that in April in the port city of Santa Marta in Colombia. You can see it there. It looks like a nice place to go. I think the important thing here to recognize is that even though it wasn't in the agreement this year for COP, that in COP28 in Dubai, governments did agree to do something about moving away from fossil fuels, and they agreed to triple renewable energy, double energy efficiency. And if you combine that with reducing methanes, some of the pledges that are already made to that, this would actually make a huge difference. It would decrease global temperature increase by zero point 0.9 Celsius. I know that doesn't sound like much, but it's the difference between being in 2.6 to 1.7 Celsius globally. So that makes a huge difference. And it actually puts us in range to achieve a 1.5 Celsius degree warming over time. So this is an important thing. My guess is there were about 80 governments that were supporting this kind of an initiative. So I think it will be a well-attended conference, and I'm confident that eventually it will influence COP. So I know that some of that may seem like rather thin gruel, in terms of accomplishments. And it's true that COP can be frustrating and disappointing in terms of agreement. Let's remember that COP is a consensus process with about 196 nations that have widely divergent interests. Um, But what I want to be clear about is COP is not what's happening on the globe alone on climate change. So I'm just going to highlight one thing that I think is really important, which is what's happening in China. So you see that there's about 17 million cars from this graph, that EVs that were sold last year. It's going to be more than that this year. The important thing is you see that red line, or sorry, the red orange bar there, that's China. Everything else is Europe is the blue, the United States is the green, and the world is the gray. Why is that so important? Because China is selling cars, those EVs, everywhere. Um, I'll just give you a couple quick examples. Ethiopia, Nepal, Sri Lanka, um, they didn't have EV imports 5 years ago. Now they're half of their cars they're importing. And countries like Singapore, Vietnam, and Thailand, they're actually competing with Europeans for how many new EVs they're getting on the road. So I see Allison's on board, which means I need to wrap up. So I'm going to just go through this last couple of slides fairly quickly. China is making a commitment to less developed countries at a time when the US is pulling back or sending mixed signals. Um, the Chinese invested 80 billion in clean technology infrastructure this year and 180 billion since 2023. This is on the scale of the Marshall Plan, actually quite a bit bigger than the Marshall Plan, even if you adjust it for current dollars. Um, Renewable energy led by solar, wind, and hydro accounted for 92.5% of new global capacity added in 2024. The majority of that was in Asia. And just to give you a quick comparison of where China is relative to California, they have 17.35 million units of EV charging available as of August. California has 201,000. We're proud of that. That's more than we have gas nozzles in the state, but it's 86 times less than China has. There's a lot more I can say on that, but I'm going to just go to our last slide and end it here. So, given all this, where can California lead? Well, I think California can make a contribution on nature-based solutions where we truly, truly are leading, setting targets, standing up programs. Um, Carbon dioxide removal is another place we can lead. We've started working on the policy there. There are nascent efforts in California. There's a lot of startups. Advanced geothermal, we've done groundwork on policy. We need to get into implementation, but it's another place we can make a contribution. Bidirectional charging, as I said before, we're showing leadership. Methane reduction. California's got a satellite that tells us where methane leaks are. That's a great start, but we need to start capping those leaks and we need to share our experience with other countries. And finally, the holistic and managed transition away from fossil fuels, including eliminating all subsidies of fossil fuels from the Cap and Invest program. That's something we need to do in California. We're starting to have those conversations. Would be a huge contribution, as you can see, to the global discussion about that. And California needs to continue to step up and represent climate action for the U.S. in international forums until we have a new federal administration. And I will end it there. Thanks so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Barry. We do have time for at least one quick question before we move on. And I just noted that, you know, through some of the conversations you had at the for your presentation, so doesn't China do a lot of things that are actually bad for the climate? And it's sounding like they're actually a climate leader. Could you talk a little bit more about that before we transition to the next?
Yeah, thank you. That's a really good question. So I'm going to say a couple things about this, may or may not be controversial. The Chinese aren't necessarily doing this because they're climate leaders. They're doing this because it makes economic sense, right? They've invested heavily in solar, they've invested heavily in electric vehicles, and they are, out to do good things for their economy. Um, and yeah, they are doing some things that are not helpful. They are still standing up coal plants, both in China and overseas. And their nationally determined commitments were nothing, they were pretty meh. They were very mediocre. So um, they have a lot of work to do too. But I think one of the things we have to realize in the US is that The world is changing. We're moving to a new energy system, and the Chinese are beating our pants off.
And that is a good point to clarify. And thank you, Barry, for saying that. We're gonna now move on. So, Barry, you can go ahead and go off camera, and I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Alrighty. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit now to focus on carbon dioxide removal, which is part of our climate change solution portfolio. It was a pleasure to connect with Vinny Sala, who is involved in carbon dioxide removal, specifically enhanced rock weathering. But before I pass the microphone over to him, I'm going to share about before he shares about what he's doing with Terradot, I'm going to share a bit about carbon dioxide removal, which is also known as CDR. And this is an ever evolving part of the many solutions to climate change. And we should be paying close attention to the different potential solutions. I'm going to talk about what is carbon dioxide removal, why is it needed, and ways to do it. But before, first and foremost, I'm going to talk about the carbon cycle and legacy emissions. So, carbon dioxide removal addresses a very unique part of the climate crisis, which is legacy emissions. So, even when we have fully stopped the use of fossil fuels, there will still be leftover CO2 pollution in the atmosphere, and these are known as legacy emissions, and they will continue to impact climate change. Now, CDR actually happens naturally through the carbon cycle, which describes how carbon atoms travel from the atmosphere into organic material, such as plants, animals, or into the oceans and rocks. I want you to think about photosynthesis. The plant takes in CO2 and then releases oxygen back into the atmosphere. But what happens to that absorbed CO2? The CO2 will stay in the plant and is also stored in the root system, and some is also stored in the soil. Healthy soils will store more carbon, and it is healthy for a soil to have carbon in it. So while the plant is alive, the CO2 is stored. When the plant dies and decomposes, some of the CO2 is then released back into the atmosphere. This is why there is such an effort to plant more trees, as the more we have, the more CO2 they capture. This is one of the many natural processes of our planet, and it's really unfortunate. But however, the amount of carbon activity that humans release through land use changes and fossil fuels have completely oversaturated this process. So, looking at this graph here, you can see that we will need CDR in order to achieve net zero and stabilize the climate. The orange part of the graph shows the remaining emissions, which means emissions that are hard to avoid, such as emissions from cement production or planes. And CDR brings this average below the zero line to achieve the net negative emissions. Oh, my apologies. I accidentally clicked on the link. So when the slides come out, if you click on the graph, it'll take you to the link. So what is carbon dioxide removal and why is it needed? Carbon dioxide removal refers to the activities that remove existing CO2, known as the legacy emissions I just mentioned, from the atmosphere and store it durably, whether it's in products like the land, ocean, or geological storage sites. CO2 has a long lifespan in the atmosphere and can remain there for over 1,000 years. You can view CDR as a sort of waste management service, similar to cleaning up an oil spill in water or trash along the beach. Once the CO2 is stored underground or in plants or in durable materials such as concrete, it no longer can harm the environment. And CDR encompasses a variety of strategies, including nature-based solutions, which can help create resilient communities in the face of climate change and help ensure food security and create better water and air quality while all while capturing carbon. This combination of reversal of pollution and creation of resilient communities is critical to protect people from climate change. And I want to make it very clear, carbon dioxide removal is not carbon capture and storage. It is not CCS. CCS is a type of technology that can be applied to smokestacks at industrial facilities that theoretically prevents CO2 from entering the atmosphere. But it continues business as usual, which is not something we want. CDR instead draws down the legacy emissions that continue to impact climate change. So here you can see the variety of different types of CDR strategies. It truly is a portfolio approach. There are many different strategies, and we need to have this portfolio because each one has their different pros and cons. We at the Climate Center just finished a report on CDR, and we will go ahead and put that in the link so you can learn more about what we are working on as it relates to carbon dioxide removal. Another carbon dioxide removal strategy is enhanced rock weathering, which Vinny Sala from Terradot will speak about now. But before I give the microphone over to Vinny, I'd like to introduce him. Vinny Sala oversees legal compliance and institutional affairs at Terradot, ensuring the company operates with integrity, transparency, while also collaborating with scientific knowledge and private sector lens for regulatory frameworks. Throughout his career, Vinny has been instrumental in building legal frameworks and regulatory foundations across diverse sectors, leading legal and compliance functions in a fast-growing and technology-driven companies. Handing it over to you, Vinny. Welcome so much, or welcome to the webinar.
Thanks, Alison. It's great to be here. I'm here. I'm based in Brazil, so I'm gonna say good afternoon for you all. But I know that it might be good morning for most of the people here. We just share my screen here, so we can go through my presentation about Terradot. Just confirming, can you see my screen and hear me perfectly fine?
That's good, Vinny.
All right. So what I want to cover here is a little bit about Terradot. Then we're going to say what ERW means, like enhanced rock weathering. And finally, a little bit about the agro benefits of this methodology and how we measure the removals. So to begin about Terradot, this is a little bit about our business leadership. So Terradot was born in Stanford Climate Lab among the founding team here. So all of them partner and they decided that they will do ERW, and they decided that Brazil will be a good place for that. And then they go to the capital markets to raise a few funds. And we are fortunate at our company to count with very leader investors on our cap table, like John Doerr, Cheryl, and Ann. And we raised $54 million in our Series A. And a little bit of our goal, and this ties a lot with what John Doerr claims, is that we want to take process that are historically in the removal of carbon and accelerate that. And when I say that it's tied with what John Doerr says, he usually says that all the time, like that he want to have all those brilliant minds that has created all of those technologies that are helpful for us, but is carbonizing the world, choose that same smart minds to create the technology that will decarbonize the world and will reduce emissions and all of that. So he's investing in this kind of business, and we are fortunate to count with him at Terradot as part of his investment. And what is the really secret sauce of our company is not the founding team, not the investor, but the mix of scientific community that we have on our team. And as you can see from this slide, we have people from Argentina, Brazil, US, and all of those are working in three main subjects. So one, hydrology, two, geology, and three, agronomists. So we've got all of those people from leading universities to sit together and figure out the best way possible to do enhanced rock weathering. And enhanced rock weathering is what we call the silicate weathering cycle. So from historical years, whenever there is a rain in Earth, the silicate rocks weathering generate alkalinity, and this will create a chemical reaction that will capture carbon in the atmosphere, will stock in the rock, and this will go all the way down into the soil, into the underground water, and it will go until the end and the bottom of the ocean. This process will be a chemical reaction that will take hundreds of thousands of years. So then we thought about, okay, we know that Earth does that. How can we do that in an accelerated model? So that's the moment that kicks in the enhanced rock weathering that basically we want to speed up this process. One of the key factors for this chemical reaction to take place is the surface area. So we were talking about like what would have happen if we increase the surface area uh, so that we can have more chemical reaction. In consequence, we can remove more carbon. So the process of enhanced rock weathering is that first you get in agricultural lands and you spread the rock into those lands. This will regenerate soil, will capture the carbon as it's raining, and will go, as you can see in the slide, as the step 1, 2, and 3. So this is a little bit how it works. And this slide, I love to talk about it because it shows a little bit of the potential of the removals. So in rock weathering can remove 4 to 5 gigatons of CO2. And what is beautiful about it is that Brazil has a large potential in terms of feedstock. And that's the reason why we say at Terradot that we was born in California, but we are raised in Brazil because it has this enormous potential. Now, when I say the enormous potential, what I mean by that, first, we depends on the agribusiness. And agribusiness in Brazil represent 29.4% of Brazilian GDP. Second, we also use the mining because we use silicate rocks. In Brazil, it's basalt, which has 270 billion in BRL, around like $60 billion in revenue in 2024. And if you look into the right side of the screen, you're going to see that each dot represent one of the 1,400 active quarries in Brazil. So we're not creating new quarries. We're not doing anything else. We're just leveraging existing capabilities that is in the country. And how we do that, and a little bit more about Brazil. So we're in the tropical area. So we have fast rock weathering, meaning that we have more raining. It's a warm and wet climate, and all of that facilitates the chemical reaction. And at the end, we're benefiting from two specific things in the geography of Brazil. So first, 90% of Brazilian energy is clean energy. So when we're doing the carbon accounting and we are thinking about our social responsibility here, Brazil is fairly well placed to succeed on it based on it. And in addition to this, there is one component that is very important that different from other regions of the world, Brazil has the quarries together with the agricultural land. So when you transport the rock, you're not actually doing like a bunch of emission with trucks. What you're actually doing is like driving 100 kilometers maximum to deploy the rock and do the weathering process. And all of that put all together places Brazil in a very favorable position for the ERW technology. And on top of everything that deals with TRW, there are much more benefit when it comes to agricultural land. So from our first experiments in Brazil, we saw that depending on how much basalt we deploy, we're going to have an increase from 7 to 15% on the crop. And why that? Because when you deploy basalt, you're actually restoring the pH balance and you are creating a better resistance for those crops. And at the same time, you are reducing the requirement of lime, which in opposite from basalt rock and silicate rock in overall, lime is a source of carbon emission. So we're making the agricultural much more environmental responsible on that. And likewise, you also increase the performance of fertilizers, so reduce the amount of pesticide and fertilizer that you're using in the food production. And at the end, you're not competing on land, which is one of the main challenge that we all face when we're talking about removals, because you are leveraging agricultural existence that is already there. And how we do that and how we match these with the UN goals. So first, we are working surely on the climate change mitigation. Second, we're still adapting the food system to make sure that we accommodate our technology. And at the same time, we're creating an economic development. So when I first joined Teradot, and this is a personal feeling that I have, uh, what caught me is that we were doing good, and good. So there was no drawback in what we were doing as we're collaborating in a sense that has a lot of synergies with all of these three pillars that I put in the slide here. And this is a fortunate place to be. So you can actually be part of the solution while also helping the food production, while also helping the economic development. So there is, at least for us, no conflict among these pillars here. And finally, like Teradot works just like a project enabler. So we got the land, we got the CDR demand market, and we got the rock, and we put all of them into our project, and we're gonna deliver the CDRs in enhanced rock weathering afterwards. Uh, and the MRV, which is certainly one of the most critical components of that, is that we're gonna do thousands of analysis from soil, plant tissues, gas, pore water, groundwater, and stream water. Why that? Because we can measure how many carbon are actually being removed by identifying the different chemical reactions and the chemical components that happen over time until it goes into the underground water. And when we share our long-term vision is right now we are super intensive in the MRV, but with technology and AI, what we believe is that we're going to have enough data to actually shift from a model that is uh, work intensive to a model that actually can create uh, much more data, and we're going to capture signals that what we have mapped under the process is actually happening, and this is going to be the DMRV solution. So this is a little bit about our long-term strategy and how we're doing that. Like we're not doing this by ourselves. We're partnering with a bunch of entities. But I want to first say about Embrapa. And during COP, people were asking me how to describe Embrapa. And the way I can tell, mostly for the American people, is Embrapa is some sort of agricultural federal agency with NASA for Brazil. And why I'm telling you that, this might look funny, but is because they're for several years developing new technology that are super groundbreaking uh, for for the agricultural business in the country. As you saw in my first slide, uh, it represents a lot for our country's GDP. So Embrapa already knows a lot about using rock powder to restore soil healthy. What we're partnering with them is to let them know and count with them to educate uh, farmers across the countries that it also can help remove carbon. So with those populations, like they're happy to be part of the solution um, on it. And on the other hand, we have accessing financing. So we partner with Catalyst Bank and all of that. And we are always activating global agriculture and mining that in the first moment is not obvious that those players will be part of the solution, but at least on our perspective, there is no other way than putting them into the center of the solution and leveraging what we know after science that can be helpful. Uh, and to finish here, our goal at the end is put carbon removal back on track, help land health, and scale the business in the urgency that matters. So for us, what put us in a very strong position in this market is once you deploy rock, you can start measuring the removals in the year after. So I just want to thank you all for listening a little bit about Terradot. I know that most of the people doesn't know what ERW means, enhanced rock weathering. And I'm here to share a little bit of this knowledge and show that we have CDR paths that can succeed over time, and ERW being one of those. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much, Vinny. We really appreciate your presentation. I do have a couple questions. So the first question I have are there any environmental impacts to using that much rock on agricultural lands?
That's a great question, Alison. And rock powder has been used in Brazil for a while. So everything that you work in on that is under a protocol of the environmental minister as well as the agricultural minister. So you don't have any risk of contamination. What you have is, because it's the powder, you need to take care about the safety measures on how and when you apply. So if there is a lot of windy, you cannot apply, because then the windy will take much of your rock powder. It's not to say that this rock powder will create a disease in people, because it can fly maximum 1 kilometer, 2 kilometers, but we will always take care about that. But on the food safety, that is a concern. There is no problem at all.
Wonderful. So another question is, what does the community engagement look like for an enhanced rock weathering project, and have these projects faced pushback or support from the community members around them?
Right now, I face a lot of support from the community members, because one time, at one side, sorry, you are actually helping the food production, because you're increasing the food production, and that will generate wealth for that community. On the other, the way our business model operate is that we give for the farmer the rock powder, because we're doing all the studies for him, like what kind of powder we should give in which granularity, for which kind of soil, for what kind of crop, and all of those together is what we do for free for him. And what we got in exchange are the carbon credits that we're going to sell to the CDR demand. So there is, again, this win-win strategy. So the community typically receive us very well, and they're excited about the innovation.
Great. Have there been any lessons learned since you've started working at Teradot in terms of successfully implementing a ERW project?
Well, I think since I started at Teradot, and as you know from my presentation, I'm new in the climate industry, and I'm excited to be part of it. What I learned is that there's a lot to be told around ERW for people to understand what the technology is about and how beneficial this can be in a role that cannot wait 20 to 30 years to solve the carbon the climate heat problem. So that's, I think, my biggest learning, and I thank you, Alison, to making the space for us here to tell a little bit about ERW under the Climate Center webinar.
Yes, of course. So at COP30, I believe we were both a part of the first ever carbon dioxide removal pavilion. And I was wondering if you were able to either give a presentation or talk at that pavilion, if there's anything you learned or got to meet with any different countries to hear what they were doing and what that collaboration might have looked like for you at COP.
Sure. So yes, we were in the pavilion. We also talked in the IETA ICC pavilion as well, and Singapore pavilion, and a few others. What I learned is that CDR was not fairly well known, so there is a route to go there. ERW even less. That's where I'm coming from, even on your other question. What makes me excited a little bit is around COP30, there is a coalition that is currently being held by some of very relevant countries to develop methodologies around the regulated market. And I think the removal, the CDR community overall can tap into this initiative and actually go side by side with regulators and let them know that there are plenty of technologies and good things that will be helpful for all of them. So I think the CDR pavilion and this presence allow us to be connected with these kind of policymakers that will end up being the ones that will make the road for us to succeed as a planet.
Definitely. I thought it was really cool to be a part of that pavilion. And it was the first ever CDR pavilion at COP30, which, 30 COPs, and it's the first time it's there. So, it's in an ever evolving, many different strategy technologies. And um, collaboration is so important, and hearing from others what's working, what's not working, how to move forward is only going to be beneficial. So, great to hear you had a good experience with them as well. I'm going to now invite Barry to come back on camera, and we're going to do just a couple broad questions. So Barry, for both of you, looking at COP, do you think that it is worth the effort given the very slow glacial pace that we are moving forward on progress on climate action? I'll first start with Barry and then Tiffany.
Yeah, I do. It is incredibly frustrating. That's the first thing I'll say. As I said, it's a process that is inherently set up to be difficult to make decisions through. But it is incredibly important to convene all these folks. And a lot of things happen in COP that do not end up in the final agreement. I mentioned some of the bilateral agreements that California signed. Lots of other nation states are doing, the same things. Um, and it's just a time where you can hear about the innovations that are going on in other countries, other regions, and that people can strategize together. So, I think it's not the thing about COP that I think we have to understand is COP should continue, but it's not enough by any stretch of the imagination. And I think seeing some of these groups that are focused internationally on particular issues that don't require a consensus decision-making process may be a way of going forward and accelerating the process in the future.
Thank you, Barry. And now, Vinny, over to you. Do you think COP is worth it? And moving forward, are you planning to go to future COPs and engage in that space?
Uh, Certainly, it should continue to happen and work. Certainly, we will do our best to participate in the most intense way. As part of COP30, I was fortunate by the end of the 3 days to get into the Article 6 discussion room, where they were discussing the 6.2 and 6.4 mechanism. One of those was successful and the other was not. And I agree with Barry that it's hard to get into the consensus that is required for the resolution to be passed, but at the same time forces people to have the discussion that otherwise they will not be having in the length of intensity that COPs require. So that's one side of my vision. The other side is because everybody is all together, it creates opportunity like how we meet to share a little bit of knowledge and a little bit of what's going on all over the places and restore the belief and trust that we can create a better world for those who are still to come.
Definitely. It is so inspiring to be in a global forum where everyone you can feel is passionate to be there and cares about the future of our planet. So on my personal note, is I definitely think COP is worth it. I think it is a very powerful, both policy wise, but also with the overall feeling that needs to happen for making climate change, addressing climate change. One final question before we wrap up today, and the question is, were there any policy solutions you wish were better represented at COP30? I'll first go to Barry and then Tiffany.
Um, well, as I said, no one was really talking about advanced geothermal, so I think that really needs to get more play. Um, I don't know if this is really a solution, but I will say that uh, I was frustrated to see how indigenous people, like I said, though they were present there, to have them better represented in the actual process, like that's something we have to do. These people are taking care of the resources that we all depend on, and to have them basically shut out of the official proceedings is unacceptable. And I think, and it's also practically a huge mistake. And I recognize it might be complicated because they're not a nation, right? But still, they're a very significant stakeholder. And it's not just in Brazil, it's all over the world. There are people shepherding resources that we need them to be doing, and they're not being included in the discussion. So I think those are the two things I would feel.
Very important. How about you, Vinny? Anything that you wish was better represented at COP30?
Well, I'm gonna get a ride on what Barry said, and add in the final that because all the diplomats and all the negotiators and all the policymakers were there, uh, I think we should take an opportunity to open space for them to be outside of the negotiation rooms and listen to all the other technologies that are just like across the corridor, literally, that can help them meet their NDC goals and all of the other. It's not to say that we in the private sector, we as think tanks as well, shouldn't try to educate them in other matters, but that creates an environment that allow us to do that in a fairly efficient way. So my point will be that make them available as well, because sometimes I had the impression under COP that we're talking about CDR, for example, for people that was super familiar with CDR. And I don't need to educate them on ERW, for example. I need to get someone in the government to understand that there is a path for removal that also protects food, that leverage in existing infrastructure, to use Teradot business as an example. And I bet there are multiple other situations that we can do the same. So that's what I feel that it was missing in that COP.
Very good point. It's interesting to be in such a global forum and say give a presentation. And sometimes you have a huge audience, sometimes you have a small audience, and getting your information out to a broader audience is really important. And this is a great opportunity to do that. And I agree that there could be even more coordination within COP. I know Barry and I talked a lot about trying to connect with people ahead of time, start group chats, trying to get people to go to different events, and just a little bit more coordination with everyone so that everyone has access to the information that we're trying to share, we're trying to learn about. And yeah. Well, thank you both so much. I really appreciated your presentations. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. I just wanted to share with everyone that we did just complete our CDR report. I will be going ahead and putting that in the chat. So please check that out. We also, our call to action for this webinar is to please urge Governor Newsom to accelerate the adoption of affordable, clean energy, a fossil fuel phase out, and nature-based climate solutions. The call to action will also be in the chat. And again, thank you everyone for joining us. If you have any questions, please feel free to follow up with the Climate Center. And we look forward to working on policy coming in 2026 to help move the needle on climate. Thank you so much.